Hi folks, today we're going to discuss a little bit about thought and practice. So I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association, that's secularbuddhism.org. And if you're interested in helping to foster a wiser, kinder, less stressful world, then consider subscribing to this channel. We're going to have videos out roughly once a week on Mondays on topics such as these. So I think for many of us in the modern world, we tend to think of, for want of better description, a spiritual path or a path to self-betterment along the lines of something scholastic or something that we would do in school. Because that, I think, is a path we all understand from our own childhood as one that led us from a position of not understanding much to a position of understanding a lot. And that's a kind of a cognitive undertaking. What we want to do is to learn certain kinds of facts, to learn certain kinds of cognitive relationships between parts of the world. What we want to be able to do is perform well on certain kinds of written tests, on exams, maybe on oral exams. We want to get the right answers to the right questions. And somewhat similar to this, although different in its way, is the Western religious idea, where the goal is achieved by having a certain kind of assent to a certain kind of proposition, such as that Jesus is the Son of God, or that Jesus died for our sins, or similar kinds of claims. And these are cognitive claims. So what's important is that you understand the claim and that you bring yourself to a place where you can agree to it. And that religiously is the goal in much of Western religion, and even in Middle Eastern religion as well. But the Buddhist approach to the path is really quite different. It begins with an assent of a certain kind. The first part of the Eightfold Path is right view. And right view is, at least at its beginning, a kind of cognitive assent to a certain kind of understanding of the world. In particular, that there are right ways and wrong ways to behave, or better ways and worse ways to behave, more and less skillful ways to behave and to think, to speak, and so on. And without that beginning, it's hard to start on the path. But in the Buddhist understanding, that's only the first step, rather than being, say, 90% of the path. If we understand it in a sort of a Western or a contemporary sort of school type context, rather than that being 90% of the path, in Buddhism really that's only the very, very first step. So the rest of the path is a path of practice, where we undertake certain kinds of effort over long periods of time. And that's because for most of us, I know myself included, we begin this journey, a journey towards wisdom and kindness and towards a lower level of stress, by being in a place of a lot of unwise conduct and belief, by being unkind too much of the time, and by being stressed out a lot. You know, obviously for most, if not really all, of the remaining time of our practice, we're trying to minimize these, or we're trying to do what we can so that we are bringing ourselves to a place of a wiser, kinder, and less stressed out kind of life. And that takes effort. It's not simply a matter of understanding the way things are, although that's the place to start. Now, in certain schools of Buddhist belief and practice, in particular the schools around Zen, view cognitive understanding as part of the problem. For people in a Zen context, what they'll be trying to do is to sort of break you of this attempt to try to understand the way things are and work things out cognitively. And that can be very useful, because cognition is not the whole point. And if you're trying to get at things sort of up in the head all the time, you're really not doing yourself much of a favor. Although that can be very, very useful for many people, and for many people, it can be useful for a while as well, even if not the whole way. In an early Buddhist understanding of the path, cognition is important. We can't simply put it aside. Part of what we're doing is trying to understand the way things are, and part of what we do in practice is to bring that understanding to bear on the way we see things in the world while we're in formal meditation, or just while we're making effort in the world around us. The Buddha describes the path as similar to a horse in training for the king. So the horse begins training by being wild, and by having to be restrained by the trainer, by having to have a bridle put on. Sometimes the trainer will have to use a whip. That is equivalent to us at the beginning of training, where we don't really know what we're doing, and so we're using the cognitive capacities of the mind essentially to bridle us and to drag us in one direction, even though we really don't want to go in that direction. And we all know that that's not very successful. It can be maybe modestly successful, 5% of the way, but the other 95% we're really struggling with ourselves, and oftentimes we're really not able to do as well as we would like to do. But as the horse continues in training, the bridle becomes less necessary, the whip becomes less necessary, and the horse begins to understand, or I should say, to be trained properly so that it's able to behave spontaneously the way the king would like. And in the same way, by undertaking practice over a long period of time, we can bring ourselves from a place of where we're trying to convince ourselves cognitively of something to where we're able to engage in unself-conscious, automatic, or natural kinds of behavior that are exactly in line with the way we would like to behave. And the way we would like to think, and the way we would like to speak, and so on. The way I like to think of it is it's sort of like learning a sport. You begin with instruction in the way you're supposed to stand and the way you're supposed to, say, swing the bat. And at the beginning, those kinds of movements they feel awkward. They don't feel natural. And we can even sometimes not exactly understand why we're supposed to be doing this, but we follow because we're told that it's useful. However, if we're under good training, if we're under a trainer who knows what they're doing, we will find that the training becomes easier and easier, and we become better and better at the task with time until we get ourselves to a place where we're able to behave quite well in the sport. We're able to be successful unselfconsciously, right? As they say, you can't think your way to behaving better in playing tennis or baseball or soccer or whatever happens to be, because if your mind is in the way, you're certainly not going to be performing as well as you might be if you were doing it automatically. And so the Buddha says that a person is finished with training once they have become awakened, so to speak. They're incapable of doing wrong actions because those have been trained out of them, as it were. We can take that however we would like to. It may be that it's simply not possible for most of us to get to that stage. It may be that it's not possible for any of us really to get to that stage. I don't know. But what I do know is that it's possible to get farther along here so that we're better off than we were. But it's important to I think, understand the relationship between the cognitive aspect, which is where we begin, and the spontaneous, non-self-conscious place we want to be at, which is where we want to get to. And the critical part of this is right effort and is training and is doing formal meditation. Now, right effort includes much more than formal meditation because we should ideally be making an effort all the time. As the Buddha says, effort is sort of like a lute player. If a lute is strung too tightly, it's not playable. And if it's strung too loosely, it's also not playable. So the effort that we make, guided by our sort of rational impulses, can't be overly stressed, can't be overly tight, at the same time that it can't be overly lazy. It has to be moderated. And I think we all probably know this from our own personal experience, or will come to know it in time, because if you make too overwrought an effort, you're really not going to get yourself any place. In the same way, if you don't make any effort, you're also not going to get any place. So if you're interested in helping to foster a wiser and kinder and less stressed out world, I would suggest considering subscribing to the channel, and we'll be having discussions like this about early Buddhism, about secular Buddhism, about both introductory issues and more scholarship-oriented issues roughly once a week. And also, I really hope that you guys will consider leaving some comments or questions down below. I'm always interested in comments and in discussions you guys might want to have with one another. And if you're new to the channel, thanks so much for coming by. I hope you enjoy this. And I hope you will take a look at some of the other videos on the channel and see what you think. And if you're a long-time watcher, then welcome back. And thanks again so much. I'm really glad to have you guys here.